Well, a big warm welcome to everyone to this very special 40-minute Mentor Live. As a COO headhunter, our guest today is someone that I've been looking forward to getting on the podcast for a very long time. So, Sujata, thank you so much for being here and sharing your mentorship with us. I can't wait to dive in. But we probably should start with intros. I don't want to speak for you, so do you mind telling our audience a little bit about your sort of career story and any threads that kind of tie it all together?
Sure. I am American, but I've lived here for 25 years. You just can't tell from the accent. So I do have an English passport. Early years was all kind of training. So accounting, banking, consulting, all the typical EY, Goldman, Bain. And then I spent about 16 years at American Express in a broad range of roles, some functional, some GM. So like strategy, marketing, data, things like that, payments. But I also ran some regions. And then in the dark days of 2020, I decided to jump ship to become the CEO of Monzo, where I spent 5 years on the slightly rocky but ultimately rocket ship.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
And the common threads, I think you asked me. So common threads are basically, it's a pretty eclectic career. So I think you would say I'm really attracted to strong cultures and brands. Every role I've ever taken has been because it has the right balance of learning and impact. So opening the aperture, helping me expand my skill set, but also somewhere where I felt like I could meaningfully contribute and bring what I had amassed in terms of skills to the party. And then I think the last bit of that that's pretty clear is I'm a generalist. So I go selectively deep, but definitely a generalist.
Love that. Thank you very much. And there will be lots of generalists listening to this, so they'll appreciate that. You mentioned you joined Monzo at a challenging time. Yeah. So take us back in time to that moment. What was going on and what attracted you to that role? Why did you go for it?
Yeah, it was a kind of interesting time. It's pretty well, I think, documented in the ether what was going on at Monzo at the time, and the company was burning 10 million a month, had 3 million customers, had the founder stepped away, they had a down round, they started to do a reduction in force. The regulators were kind of closing in as they'd become a regulated bank and were struggling with some of those responsibilities. And they hadn't shipped any product in like a year. So it was a rocky time for the company. But they did have, to counteract that, the attraction was hard problems, but they had this incredible customer love that was very rare. I'd seen it at Amex, and Monzo also had that. You'd find these incredible evangelists everywhere you went that talked about how much the product meant to them and how much the company meant to them, which is super rare for a bank. And so when I was looking at that, to me, it felt like there was this incredible customer asset that was rare and problems that, while painful and hard to solve, were possibly solvable. So the challenge there.
Yeah. So it sounds like an easy gig then. Not stressful at all those first weeks.
No, it got a lot worse before it got better.
No, I mean, hats off for diving in at such a crazy time. So what were those first few weeks like? Yeah. And what were some of the gnarliest challenges you had to overcome?
It's kind of like childbirth, where you try not to remember it so that you would be willing to do it again. But I'll try to reconstruct. So, we had, because the founder had stepped away, you had a lot of people that were at home. Their average age of the company was 29. They were scared. This was the only gig they'd ever really had. They'd been on this rocket ship up until that point. It was hitting a wall. They were sitting at home, possibly in flat chairs, trying to figure out what to do. And the whole world had shifted underneath them. So I think there was so many challenges, and every day was a new fire. Like, it would be exhausting to even replay all of them. But I think the fundamental two challenges, one was really the rebuilding the culture. There was a almost like an internal civil war between engineers and the tech teams, and in a regulated bank, what it means to be regulated and compliant and safe. And those, I almost would describe them as people on the opposite sides of a boxing ring at odds with each other. And so trying to fuse that culture and create like commonality and common ground and move them towards a common goal, that was probably one of the most significant challenges. And then the other one is when everything's on fire, and it was literally every single thing was on fire, you have to like dig for momentum. Momentum, particularly in fintech, but probably in tech more broadly, is this gift. It's a bomb. And once you start to get momentum, it builds on itself. And, people start to believe, and you get more and more and more. And it's a wonderful acceleration. And so trying to create markers of momentum, both for the team so they could know, I literally called it, I think, what winning looks like. And I would stand up in front of the whole business virtually, because we were all at home, and say, this is what winning looks like for the next 3 to 6 months. If we just do these things, it will be winning. And just breaking it down for people to understand, like, this is what the markers of momentum are that will ultimately get us somewhere, both for ourselves and for the broader team, for investors, for the press, for all the regulators. You needed sort of these markers and little building blocks of momentum. And I think those were probably the two hardest things.
Love that. Had sort of clarity of this is what we've got to do, and getting everyone aligned to the same thing. It's not an easy thing, but clearly, getting through that first rocky period led to a lot of great success. Every single COO search that I've ever worked has been completely different. It's one of the great joys of doing what I do, the variety, but it's also one of the challenges. So can you talk us through like the scope of your COO role? And then I guess for any aspirational COO or any COO that would be interested, sort of what are the skills that you had to develop that sort of set you up for success in delivering?
Yeah. So it's a controversial thing to say to a firm that focuses on COOs, but I actually don't think COO is a real job. So, and so.
Brilliant. Should we edit that out?
In that, like, it's kind of just a catch-all for a role that is a counterpart to a CEO. And so what you need in that role just depends on the CEO that you have. For TS and I had a really special CEO, and I had the gift of that, where we had a wonderful relationship that was built overnight and forged in fire. But that role, my specific responsibilities changed a lot over the 5 years. So I had everything from operations and fraud and AML at a really fun time, and to the people function, to marketing, design, user research, and customer experience. It went on and on and on. So I had a lot of different things that sat under me, and it changed almost every year. And so I think what made that relationship very special, and in fact, Jonas, who was the founding CTO, when he left, he kind of got up in all hands and said something that TS and I were surprised at, but then realized was true, is he said, TS and Sujata are the refounders, because they came in and had to like refound this company at a really difficult time. And I think that kind of spoke to our mindset of how we work together, like absolute trust. I always say in those relationships and in executive teams in general, you have to have short toes. So like nobody can step on your toes. It's really about, of course, like, have high accountability in your lanes, but it's not about territory or turf. And then we had some incredibly complementary skill sets, and then some overlapping. And that was, so oftentimes how we split the role depended on capacity, sometimes personal interest, or strength. And that changed over time. But what it required was clarity on like who's got this and who's doing what. And also a really shared understanding of your leadership values and what good looks like. So that was kind of the roundabout version. For people that, so please don't aspire to be a COO. Like, I don't think that's a thing. What I think it is, if you are a generalist, a COO-ish kind of role is often, what it really requires is like low ego, high accountability. Those are like the two fundamental skills, and a real willingness to get your hands dirty and dive in. So, you should potentially have the skills to be a generalist, but go very, very specialist as needed and as required in the role.
Love that. Thank you. And it certainly sounds like you had an incredible partnership, which is, and a lot of trust, which is so important.
Yeah.
That CEO, COO relationship. It's certainly a transition, sort of going back to building again, especially when you've got a large business that's very well known. So what did that look like day to day? And how did you balance going back to building almost from scratch with certain things to running the kind of BAU of a highly regulated, very visible business?
Yeah, I mean, it requires you to take a pretty hard, unflinching look at what is, what's a sacred truth and what's a sacred cow. Like, what doesn't serve you anymore, and what are the real truths that are going to be able to take you forward. And so that, I think, is probably the most important thing, is sort of breaking that down. So I gave some examples about, like the culture needed to change in some ways, but there was some beautiful parts of the culture. Like, it was an incredibly customer-centric place. Every single person that was in the company started with customer and started with a customer need. And so that piece, was a sacred truth. That was definitely like a moat and an asset for the company that we needed to build around. So doing some of that diagnostic, it also included, thinking about like who needs to be here for this next stage, who are the most critical people that need to be in this room rebuilding this company with us. For example, at the time our platform was failing a lot, so who were the people that were really going to be able to make sure that this was a bulletproof platform to make the reality of a digital bank and the trust that it requires from a customer like come to fruition. And so spending a bunch of time actually on talent and figuring out who are the people that we need to put our arms around, that we need to make sure are in it with us, that have complete clarity around where we're headed and feel that they have a mission that they're on and accountability for things that are going to make a difference in the company, spending a lot of time on that. And then finally, it really came down to a ton of communication, but again, curation and clarity. So breaking it down, it's very overwhelming when you have a big company and a lot of things going on, and you cannot assume that everybody has context. So, I always say like a great leader, we can say CEO in this case, provides, context, clarity, curation, and care. So you need to know that you trust this person to do the right things, and they share their values to do the right things for the company. And that's the care part. Curation is, we are going to make trade-offs, and these are the ones that we're going to be able to lean into. People need that. They need to know that it's not and. The clarity piece is like how well you communicate that so everybody can be on the same page. And context is the why. A lot of people skip that, which is like, what is it that's making us do this? And in Monzo's case at that time, it was super existential. It was really easy, but even then you'd be surprised. It'd be someone particularly sitting at home, maybe in the north of England, that wouldn't know that the regulators weren't happy with us on a financial crime perspective. And so why were we swarming a bunch of people to go rebuild that capability? Because they're busy with their day job doing their thing. So providing that context would help people understand like why you're making these trade-offs, why you're doing these things in the company. And so that, I think, are on a day-to-day basis, those are the things you're always doing.
Yeah, that's absolute gold dust. That is, I hope any executive or CIO listening to this writes that down and takes that into their business, because you can see how that can lead to just more clarity and more buy-in and great results. With the speed at which AI is being developed and deployed and rolled out across the all businesses, it feels like a lot of companies are going to be going through this cycle of rebirth and sort of evolution. So for any founders listening to this that might be kind of at the start of that journey, or operators that are kind of trying to drive that change, what is your advice to them?
I think I find it really interesting right now. I love being on the bench a little bit and not being like fully immersed in the full-time operator role, because that theme of refounding, I feel like, is coming front and center now. You have a lot of this very interesting cohort. Of course, you have the AI native companies that are coming up and getting quite complex quite quickly and having to deal with the issues of scale very fast. And you have big companies that are just trying to figure out who do they partner with to be able to help transform their companies. But you have this really interesting cohort of technology companies that are at scale or scaling, but aren't AI native. And so for them, I think this concept of refounding I see a lot of parallels to that for them, which is that like, those founders kind of have to go back to basics and go through that sort of diagnostic, what is my asset, my moat, what is my right to win as a company? And are we confident in that? It could be, what we had, which is this incredible customer love and advocacy and brand. That was one of the moats. It could be distribution and relationships and C-level relationships for your product. It could be a lot of things, but understanding exactly what that asset is and how that builds into the new vision of what you're going to be. And then the second part of that, I think, is, again, looking at your sacred truths and really questioning them and having an unflinching look about like which ones of these will serve us in the new world and which ones won't. And it can be as, basic as, what is the typical size of a product team? Do we need a product leader in charge of this thing? How do we structure it? It could be as basic as that, which just sounds basic, but is actually quite transformational. And questioning those pieces and saying like, what's actually going to help us now when we need to be nimble and we need to be curious? What's our sacred truths about, or cows about talent, and who survives in this world and who doesn't? And going back to that kind of drawing board. And then kind of what we did. You have to sit down and say, like, who are the 20 people I want in this room with me? If I'm going to rebuild this business and I'm refounding it and I'm starting from scratch, who are the 20 people? Level agnostic, you know, organization part agnostic. It's not about that. It's like, if we had to build from scratch right now, who are the 20 people that need to be here? And put all of your talent strategy and time and effort into those people, and make sure that they're on that mission with you. Because if they're that good, they're probably, you know, being looked at. They're probably looking elsewhere to figure out, is there another rocket ship, and what's going to keep them there and on this mission with you. And then, you know, back to communication, like, tell everybody what you're doing and why. And as founders or leaders, whatever that is, put your time where you, and your effort, like, show what's important. So, you know, I think in this version of an AI era, it's important for the leaders to be skilled in AI and show that they're curious and that they understand and that they're building. And I think that's sort of a non-negotiable for the whole organization to follow you. And so show them what you're spending your time on, where you're spending your time, and therefore, like, allow the company to both have that communication of why you're doing it and see it in action. And that's kind of how you, over time, it's not easy, but how you shift the world.
It's great advice. Thank you. You've stepped away from Monzo, and you've had a bit of time probably to reflect on all the ups and downs. So I'm sure our audience will be very curious to hear some of your personal highlights, and also some of the biggest challenges that you overcame, and what your learnings have been, you know, on both of those.
I mean, I think from a highlights perspective, I'm really proud that I think we proved that you can have this insane commercial customer love and commercial discipline, and they're not at odds with each other, particularly in a regulated context, that those two things can still lead to a thriving and fast growing business. I think one of the things I was craving when I joined Monzo, and I certainly got in spades and as a personal highlight, is just watching incredibly talented people do very, very hard things. So, you know, I talked about platform failures. Monzo now is, you know, 100% available, will never go down, because they've built such a unique capability that's like an industry first, and no other bank has it. That's cool to, like, have been a part of that. Yeah, similarly, you know, some of the products that were deployed, like Gambling Block or things like that, where you see, like, other companies starting to copy you because it's something that's actually really good for customers, and proving that you can be a business that cares about customers and still grow. And then, like, really, it's kind of the people and the customer stories. So I love watching the people that I worked with, like, develop and continue to thrive either in Monzo or elsewhere. And then hearing the customer stories of, you know, the person that did give up gambling because of the Gambling Block, or the ADHD customer that now can manage their money really well because of the budgeting features that we have in the app, or the person that was a victim of economic abuse that was able to get out of that because of the Share With Us feature. Like, there's all these amazing little stories where if you're on a worthy mission, you can see lives transforming as a result. So I think that for me is
so impactful. And on the flip side, not to turn a positive into a negative, but what have been the biggest learnings, maybe from a leadership perspective or other, that you'll take forward for the next part of your career?
I mean, I think I had a lot of leadership learnings coming out of Amex, because I lived through it in the global financial crisis, where I was in a really interesting job at the time when the company almost, you know, became bankrupt. I was there when a senior leader died, and I was there during a CEO transition. So I took all of that learning to Monzo, which was incredibly valuable as I was going through these different eras. I think the thing that at Monzo I particularly honed was a lot of lessons around hyperscaling and what I call, like, momentum killers, and learn them sometimes painfully, you know, by making the mistakes. So the idea that, like, as you continue to scale, there are all of these kind of micro regressions on momentum. And those can be processes that spring up in your company that are attacks, meetings that are attacks, you know, new ways of having to syndicate that are attacks, and they slow people down, and they don't always add value, but they are they're an inexorable force kind of pulling your company this way towards, you know, adulthood, but slow adulthood. And so I became probably much more, it's in my nature anyway, but I probably became even more vociferous and known for trying to stamp out all of those taxes. So I used to get up on stage every year, and people would then ask me to do it at some point, but I'd give my Marie Kondo speech of like, clear out your diary. Like everybody in January 1, like stop all the recurring meetings, like look at it again, make sure that everything that you're doing is actually a good use of your time. Like, please don't have FOMO, things like that. I would make everybody spell out acronyms, because if you're hiring a lot of people, then actually it's quite exclusionary when people turn up and they have acronyms that they don't understand, and then that slows them down. So it's a tax on momentum. I used to not allow project code names. I mean, sometimes I get overruled, but like often I would try to not allow them, because the second you give something a code name, it's going to take 6 months to do, and everybody wants to glom onto it. And I'd be like, no, this is just a thing that needs to be done. Let's not call it a project. And so there was all these kind of, and they sound super anal retentive, and they kind of are. So I probably overbuilt this muscle, but it was because I felt so strongly that every time you do something like that, you see the impact it has, and disproportionately on your top performers that really just want to get on with the work and get moving. And so that's, I think, as the leader, the thing that I learned the most.
It's a great lesson. And I love the idea of Marie Kondo in your diary. I mean, if it doesn't give you joy, a lot of meetings don't give you joy, you know. It's like, so it's that's something we should all take on board. Yeah, definitely. I'd love to take the conversation. I mean, I think we could talk. There's so many things to the Monzo story, but we don't have unlimited time. So I'd love to talk about teams and performance and culture, because it's obviously a topic that's very dear to my heart, and I know to yours as well. Specifically on hiring, how have you seen hiring practices evolve over the last few years, and how has your own approach to hiring sort of developed, particularly at Monzo, but just over the years?
I think it's changed a lot, and it's changing a lot right this second. So I think you had Sandra and Charles around earlier that will give you the deep dive on all the different hiring practices that are changing. But I guess at its essence, in a big stable company, what you're usually hiring for is, culture, leadership, experience, and some kind of fit of some kind. In a hyperscaling company, you're sometimes hiring for experience, because you don't really have time to train people on the job per se, but you're usually, that can be a benefit, but at best it's a nice to have, and at worst it's actually like a poison chalice, right? And so, because things become like, we do it this way. And so often what I found myself indexing towards is like learning agility, nimbleness, high degrees of accountability, and curiosity. And then if experience was required in the role, like that experience, but that was table stakes kind of. And so those attributes, testing for those in interviews when people are pretty well coached on how to talk about it, is hard.
Yeah, definitely. And I think when we spoke a few weeks back, I loved you talked about how you feel every hire should raise the bar of the average, which I absolutely love.
Well, because ultimately it kind of goes back to that inexorable force. When you're growing, the inexorable force is trying to dilute your company. The dilution is the outcome of that, right? So you're communicating to more people, your message can get diluted. You have more customers, the feedback loop can get diluted. You have more silos or businesses inside your business, like bringing that context, clarity, and the golden threads can get diluted or worn. And so never is that more true than on the talent lens. That's like your one place where if you add someone to every team, you must be kind of creating a concentration, because otherwise you're adding to that dilution. You're already fighting that fight. So you cannot dilute the talent in your organization on top of that, because they have each job is harder to do. And so I think there's this myth where everybody's like, oh, the next hire is how I'm going to be able to do that thing. And, that's just never the case, right? If you're hiring, it's important. You must hire, you must spend the time on it. But the people that you have with you right now are the people that are going to do the job right now. And so you need to make sure that they're at that quality level. And if they're the top performers, what's going to get them excited is seeing people that they can learn from joining. That the worst comment is when someone's like, oh, but they're better than so-and-so. And like, but is so-and-so your middle performer, your top performer, or a bottom performer? Because if that's where we're setting the bar, you're diluting.
Yeah, I love that. And somebody said on the podcast before, mediocrity spreads.
Yeah.
I think it's so true. I think, and as you said, the best talent we work with, we have the privilege of working with incredible operators. They are talent magnets themselves, and they're attracted to people they can learn from. It's a real, if you can get that right, it's a game changer. I guess linked to that, how did that philosophy what was the impact of that at Monzo? And how did you assess for that sort of talent in the interview process, which is often people are well coached, right? So it's not an easy thing to do.
Yeah, it's not easy. And I think sometimes we did it well and sometimes we didn't do it well. So I don't think there's like a standard rubric. I think what I see a lot now, and I think it's important, is I see a lot of companies where the founders are very heavily involved in hiring. Very heavily involved. They own it and they meet a lot of the people. You need somewhere where there's a consistent bar. At some point we had something called bar raisers, where you had like 10 people that you could trust to hire, and they could always be looking around and being like, this is the quality level. I think almost as important as hiring is just recognizing when it's time to move on. And so, and that is 2 times. One is early on when you've made a mistake in hiring, because it's just an imperfect process by definition, and having a really high quality process to be able to make that assessment and move on with kindness, but move on. And the other version is over time moving on when the fit is no longer what it should be. And I see that bit actually people have a really hard time with. And I think it's because they feel like it's cruel. And the thing that I learned, and that I always tell everybody, is you have to get very zen in companies about the fact that if they're not big, stable companies, that there is the right time for the right people. And there are different points of scale where different requirements are needed. And when you try to make, the square peg and the round hole, force them together, you're actually doing a huge disservice to that person, because everybody knows it's not working. And then what you see is this kind of confidence doom loop for that person, where they end up kind of broken by the end when you hang on for too long. And actually, you hired them for a reason. They were good for what they did. Like out of respect, there is some version of having a real conversation with kindness about, this isn't the right thing anymore for these reasons. And you will be like a lesser person at the end of this. And I don't want to do that to you. Like that's sort of the version of like really actually caring enough to lean in and say, like, I'm zen about it, and making it not a taboo in the company, where like, this is fine. This is just a different stage. It is okay. It's not failure. It's just a different stage. And people can select the phases that make the most sense for them.
I love that point. It's something else I've talked about on the podcast a couple of times, because I think it's a real missed opportunity. Because, if you don't go into these processes, if you're not sort of almost proactive and almost having these conversations with kindness, like foresight, you could actually create incredible advocates for your brand by doing it in the right way. It's one of the things I learned early on at JBM. It's a small world. I know that the people in the first 5 years might not be the people at 10, 15 year point. So actually, by treating them with respect and kindness, having a very open conversation, supporting them with what's next, some of the people that have moved on to, wonderful things in their careers have become our biggest advocates. They've become clients. They've sent talent our way. And that struck me very early on, for the first couple of people that left JBM, was that these are actually 2 of the biggest champions for our brand. And I think companies get that so wrong.
So an example I'll give you is I once had an interview with someone from a competing digital bank that I won't name, and they were incredibly talented, like very nimble, incredibly sharp. I really enjoyed talking to them. And what I said to them at the end of that time was, I can't hire you because you will not fit into this strong culture. Your starting point is the P&L and not the customer. And so while that, I have no doubt you can build incredible businesses. I've seen it, and I think you're going to be incredibly successful. You will suffer organ rejection here, and you'll be really frustrated because everybody will be starting from a different point than you are. And you're either going to contort yourself to try to fit in, which I don't think is what you want to do at this stage of your career, or you're going to, at some point, just flame out and just be unhappy, right? And so we had this really candid conversation, and they were really keen to join Monzo. And so they were a bit frustrated, like, but I'm telling you I want to do this. I'm like, I know, but I'm telling you that I know it's not going to work. And 2 years later, they came back to me and said, you were so right. And now I'm doing this other thing. And we have like a really good relationship, and we've helped each other in other things. And so I think it's just about having your own clarity about why, and not being afraid to share that with someone with respect, like knowing that everybody's being well intended.
Thank you for sharing that. I guess it's a slight segue to my next question, which is having difficult conversations is never easy. It's a part of the job, being an executive, being a COO. And one of the hardest things, I guess, is when you're going through change and challenging situations, is how you bring a team on the journey.
Yeah.
You did that incredibly successfully at Monzo. And I would imagine there'll be lots of founders listening to this who are probably going through their own dark time at the moment and having to G up the team and bring them with them, whether it's through a pivot or a downsizing. So what are some of the main takeaways and tips you can pass on that hopefully our audience can learn and listen from?
It's back to just please don't assume that everybody knows what's happening and why. Like spell it out, show your workings with authenticity, like in maths at GCSE. Just show your workings, let them understand the context that you're facing into, ground everything in the mission that you're on and the shared values of the company. So for Monzo, there was a mission to make money work for everyone and a real value around delighting customers and making that magical in a responsible way. And so knowing that, if you ground everything in that shared values and that culture, and then you really explain the context that is driving your decisions, I think people can accept anything. Some won't. Yeah. And those people shouldn't be there anyway, right? Like some will, if they can't, with all the context in the world, understand the changes you're making and either disagree and commit or agree and like come on the journey, then they shouldn't be there regardless, because they're going to slow you down. So there's also this version that you can't win every heart and mind, and the ones that are not winnable probably shouldn't be there anyway.
Yeah, thank you. I hope you don't mind me bringing the conversation back to COOs, but while we've got
the non-job,
the non-job, a lot of our audience are COOs. Today we have some wonderful ones here, and also that will be listening and watching online. We talked about how COO roles are different in every company. They're not always called COOs, but I'd love to know, as you reflect back on the Monzo experience, like what makes a COO role a real success, and how can founders and CEOs set their COOs up for success if they're joining?
Yeah, so I think if you're hiring that job, so when you end up with a COO, whether you hire for one or whether someone becomes a COO or it's the placeholder title you give somebody, the starting point is like, what are you missing in your company first? Like what are the skill sets and the capabilities that you need this person to bring to the table? And I think a lot of people go about, I get so many founders that call me like, do I need a COO now? People are telling me I need a COO. And I don't start with forget the title. Just tell me what's missing. Like, what is it and it's not just what do you not want to do? Like, what's the work that you're not interested in? Because oftentimes it'll be like, oh, I just don't want to deal with people. You're like, okay, but that's kind of your job. So you will have to do that in some way, right? So it's not what I find unpleasant. It's what are the skills and capabilities that are missing that I need to be able to make the business thrive and to complement me. And that requires some degree of depth of thought and challenge to be able to build out what that looks like. And then some clarity for the person coming in on that role. But even if you get that right, that person can't be successful unless you invest time in getting to know each other and building that trust. And so TS and I tell that story, like in the first week at Monzo, I wasn't sure that we were going to get along because we didn't know each other, and he'd been inserted into CEO role and I had joined right before I had agreed to join before Tom had left, and then he'd left the week before. And so we didn't pick each other. And so I was like, I don't know if this is going to work. And he was sitting in California at like 11 o'clock at night. And I was sitting in London in my attic at 2, both stuck in COVID the opposite, 11 and 2. And I was like, we're just going to have to speed date. So we spent the first week, like at the end of every crazy day amidst all of that madness. And he indulged me in it for like 30 minutes, just being like, okay, tell me your story, tell me your things, tell me what you care about. And very quickly we're like, okay, I think this can work. This is how we're going to build trust. And so not everybody needs to speed date, but you need to spend the time. You need to like take your trip together, go see a customer, spend the time that actually allows you to build your instincts for what's important for each other. Yeah. And so you can't just like insert someone and then be like, off you go, just go do those things.
That's great. And the thoughts here of Love Island and COO, CEO, I feel like there's a thing here. So clearly you had this very special bond that was formed through kind of
Fire.
forcing the time. Definitely it feels like that brings the best out in people, doesn't it? Or the worst.
Or the worst,
clearly you came together at that challenging time. Are there any other tips for, say, an incoming COO about how they can really, build this relationship, build that rapport, build that trust quicker so they can have an even bigger impact?
Yeah, I mean, again, three. So one, define success as the success of the company. There is no version in this job as personal success. It is you are making your success is making the tide rise so that it lifts all ships. And so that's how you have to define success. And so then if you define success like that, ferret out the problems, because the one thing that you'll find in a company as you get more senior is nobody wants to tell you the yucky stuff. And they're certainly not telling your CEO because they want to tidy up. I call it like if anybody watches Friends, the closet in Monica's apartment. It's like the Monica closet. Like everything gets shoved in there when the CEO comes in or the founder comes in because everybody wants it to look nice and tidy. And founders are usually time pressed and stressed and have a million other real problems in their head. And so they're willing to accept that that's great because they're not looking for more problems to add to their plate. And so your job is to open the closet and dig through and be like, what are the things in here that are really going to trip us up? And then just get on with solving them. Figure out what you need to surface up to the CEO or the founder or whatever. But most of it is like, just get on with those things and delivering them, because that will unlock the organization.
Brilliant. Thank you. Before we get to our wrap-up question, one for the aspirational COO or aspirational generalist.
Yeah.
Any tips for them, about how they can, things they should be thinking about in terms of the next steps of their career, or what can help set them apart, as they go down that path?
Yeah, I just don't want anyone to get confused with generalist being a lack of depth. So like, I am a generalist, but I also ran marketing for 4 years at Amex and ran payments for a number of years and got deep in it. And I didn't preside, like I was deep in it. I didn't spend 20 years in it. I spent 3 years going deep. I helped build financial crime and the AML and fraud functions at Monzo. I'm not a fraud specialist, and I never will be, because there are people that spend 30 years in that thing. But there was no excuse for not rolling up my sleeves and going deep and understanding the problems of the day. And so each of those skill sets, so it's not like go seek out generalist things to do and that actually I think is very dangerous, because then you don't get the depth that you need. You need to build depth solving different problems and showing that you can go deep and toggle between, the root problem and the strategy and the context that it's in, and being able to deliver outcomes. But you deliver outcomes with specificity, and you do that over a number of different places and times and skills, and that's how you kind of end up being able to do that more broadly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think so many of the best COOs that I've met are naturally curious people. They want to solve big problems, whatever function that is, wherever the situation or stage of company, but they run at that difficult thing. And through that, I guess bringing the fresh lens from not having been deep in that much actually brings something different.
But the appetite to go deep, because nothing can be solved up here, right? It all has to be solved down here. So you have to be willing to spend the time, go deep, understand the context, use all that pattern matching and other skills you have, but be willing to like really get your hands dirty and show that. And I think the other quality you need to have is high degrees of accountability, like outcome driven, high degrees of accountability.
Yeah, that's so true. And ultimately, off the back of being a generalist that can go deep in areas and build that strength and skill, you then have so many more options from a career perspective thereafter. So whether it's COO that becomes a founder CEO, that becomes a GM, that goes into a different function, like this is one of the great, I know we said that COOs can be a non-job, but if you go down this path, we're in a generalist role in these sorts of hyper growth companies, the options are endless, and it's a brilliant choice of career. Finally, I've got to ask you, now that you're not a Monzo anymore, we probably should talk a bit more about actually what you're doing now, and what you're most looking forward to in H2, both like personally and professionally.
Okay, so what I'm doing now, so I am at Index Ventures as an exec in residence. It's a great group of people, and they were kind enough to invite me to spend time there. And so I spend time with their portfolio companies, sit in on deal flow, and the quid pro quo is I can help those companies be successful, but I also am getting like a front row seat to all of the changes that are happening driven by AI and the technology everywhere, right? It's just one of the best places. They see everything and I get to see everything as a result. And so I'm building my own intuition, not deeply immersed in one company, but across many, to see what do I think the implications of all of this is and how is it unveiling itself. And I love that. It's sort of like a little mini MBA with an opportunity to make an impact on some of their companies. So I feel like it's a good trade. So that's my my gig at the moment. And then personally, so I've been watching a lot of sports. I don't know if all of you, the sports central right now, but I have two daughters. One's 20, one's 17, and in her going into her upper sixth year in school. So that's lots of fun. And then I'm a theater nerd, so I guess I've somehow found myself as a co-producer of a touring musical in the U.S. And so I don't know if that speaks to like my creativity or my impulsiveness, but that's keeping me a little bit busy.
Okay, love that. So round two, we'll make it a musical version. Well, Sujata, it's honestly been the biggest pleasure. I have admired you from a distance for a while. I'm so thrilled that we got to meet a few weeks ago and chat, and that you've, I know you're very busy helping kind of the great and the good of the up and coming startups at the moment, but thank you for coming, sharing your mentorship with us.
Thank you.
Yeah, I know there's going to be a lot of people interested in your story, so thank you for sharing it.
Thanks, everyone.